Hello everyone and welcome to this little featurette with Thomas J. Peters, or short Tom, and yours truly. We'll be talking about the soundtrack of Numina, how it came to be, collaborating between a composer and a game dev, and you get to hear bits of the soundtrack along the way. I hope you enjoy.
So, let's get right into the meat. I've always wondered how do you approach or sort of basing writing something out of like referential material, because I think many other game developers or other people who commission music pieces have a similar or must have a similar struggle sort of getting their point across, what they're aiming for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, especially Manuel, it's crazy looking back at this experience of being an artist because for me, in 2012, when we had first met and we first started working on cues together, that really Numina was one of the first projects I even worked on,
Oh, okay.
and so beyond that, it was not only was it one of the great and wonderful collaborations that I've been a part of, but it was one of the first ones. And I think as a composer, there's a certain sort of naivety that comes into that. You come in and you're very naive to just how collaboration works. What made me pleased looking back was how you did have a very strong vision for the project from the get-go, and because you had such a strong vision, those are traits that I look for in the people I work with. Is someone who has a very clear idea of what they would like the music to do. And reference materials are taken at face value, I think. I think when you're working in this business, you take them at face value. You look at them for the aesthetic. Like, what are the emotions that those demo tracks portray?
Mm.
And I think that we did have a few tracks that we went back and we were like, maybe that's not right for this scene. A specific one I remember was Temple in the Clouds. I remember composing that, and it's very weird. I think a lot of the time, even when I feel like, even when almost 100% of the time, I get this strange feeling that something's not right, and I couldn't explain it. And sure enough, you came back and you were like, could we go a little bit mellower on this and more, and give it that lofty feeling, which the new version does. It's ethereal and grand.
That's a really good example, this piece, because I initially worked with another German composer on the game, and this was the one and only track he did for Numina, and I was very happy actually with what he was going for, but he had a sort of completely different take on the whole thing. He was sort of more focusing on this nauseating feeling you get from heights, because you're walking on this very narrow paths that wind through these mist clouds up to this temple. Ultimately, what turned out was something different from what the initial track I was looking for was, the sort of reference track. And in this collaborative effort, we turned this not completely around, but into a different direction. It's a really amazing scenery piece, so to say. One of my favorites from the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, me too. And that's the thing is Numina just continually had so many tracks that were just a joy to work on.
So, we already touched upon some of the types or of pieces Numina has, and I think one really central theme or type of themes were the character pieces. What are some of the things that you consider or think about when creating a piece for the character?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. In terms of the characters, the whole story of Numina and the very crazy things that happen within the story. No, there will not be any spoilers, especially for me. But the story was so complex and wonderful and interesting, and it just compelled me to keep writing for the game. I wanted to. I was literally composing the score because I was so inspired by reading the story, by hearing what would happen to these characters next and how they would react to these situations. And I think a lot of times when we get to the central idea of a character's theme, a lot of times these same themes are going to come back in the exact same way. Or when they come back in a different way, it's for a dramatic scene or something that happens to those characters. It's up to them to react like so. When I'm breaking down composing a character theme, one of the first things that I consider is what has this person what have they had to go through? And what is essentially their mantra musically? Like what does their personality sound like? And a lot of times that's the number one question. What does their personality sound like? What has shaped them who they are? Because when we think about it as people, as separate human beings, the number one thing we relate to is what a person's gone through, and whether or not we know their personality. The personality is really the musical character or the musical style of the piece. But really, when we dig deep, is what has this character gone through? How are they reacting emotionally to this scene or to who they are, to what they're going through? So what I did for each of the characters was start there. And I think we start with a character like Sean. Sean is always put in a place of being that steadfast optimist. And it's the sort of thing where he's almost a bit of a broken optimist. He has such intense things that such intense obstacles that show up, and he does definitely emotionally react to them, and it hurts him. But he always tries to see the bright side of the situation, and a lot of the times those events just take a toll on him. And so I wanted a piece to be in a major key for him, to highlight that optimism and that sort of reflective optimism, and that we hear sort of in the high strings. And we hear that in his piece, and but it's outlined by this very sort of melancholic bassoon part. And this bassoon part feels very warm and very emotional on that section, and it's done that way intentionally because the character is a steadfast optimist, but he's simultaneously dealing with all these emotions, and you as the player is guiding his decisions, obviously, in the story, but the character Sean himself has these conflicting emotions, and that's the essence of the character.
It's really interesting how you're describing this, because what I first think of is how I write dialogue. It sounded to me like composing a character theme is, musically speaking, the same thing, where you're trying how you get into the feelscape, or how you would, in the mindset of this character, and how would you express the emotions that are sort of distinct for this character musically.
Yeah, and you hear it even. I use Sean as the main example because I think Sean's the hardest character to write for musically. I think he's the most difficult to write for because there's no one dimension to his emotions. But a couple of other character themes, if you don't mind me discussing this momentarily.
Not at all, not at all.
That's excellent because I would say probably that the character themes are the most fun to write out of anything. They're absolutely the most fun because I love getting to the core of that character and unraveling their story. You know, sort of it's like an unraveling type of experience where there's a surface level of the emotions that character's feeling in the scene or the general feel of how their music should be. And then the deeper level, which is the one I get excited about, who is this person? Expressing their highlights and their flaws musically, both. And I think for Sarah's theme, it has a very sort of dreamy and wondrous beginning. But most of that had to do with her appearance. And sort of the way I was reading it and the way I was interpreting the character, continually it's coming back that Sarah is very, on the outside, very, very ethereal, and like she has this sort of light emanating from her.
Yeah, I think also for those of you who haven't played the game yet, thought it was very fun, at least with Sarah, to have her hair color be pink, which isn't that unusual for JRPGs, but to make that actually unusual, which is also sort of this ethereal or otherworldly appearance that you mentioned.
Yeah, and even harmonically with her theme, the music harmonically mirrors that of an Eastern type of sound. And I did that on purpose because we wanted to sort of, here's this character who is very unusually different from the rest of everyone in this world. And there's also some past pain and hurt. And that's the part I wanted to get to, is her, you notice later in her theme, we get to a darker section, and I wrote that in there on purpose to hint at her backstory. And you get hints of that with all the characters, I think. Cassandra's theme, same thing. You on the surface, you get that kind of whimsical and that aggravated sound.
Especially talking about surface level or getting the first impression you get from a character. I think she was one of the most fun characters because she's on a surface level so out there and saying what she thinks, but as time passes, you get to know that it might be just a facade. You can definitely hear these underlying things in Cassandra's theme and also in the other character themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I just love her entrance, by the way.
Yes.
I mean, it's just fantastic. And the character, just right off the bat, I'm like, okay, well, we got to capture the music right when she shows up. Intense sort of aggravation right from the start, but then we'll get in here and we'll start to tell a more bold and also capable character. That's the B section, that string section. You know, when the strings come in the B section.
Yeah.
That's sort of meant to be her bolder side. With character themes, the goal is to be able to listen to it a second or third time and to catch things, you know. And we're hearing it in the context of the scene, but it's actually telling you about the character, and in a way, it's like a musical foreshadowing. And we even get that with Proserpina. Her theme, I always thought of Proserpina as one of the main characters of the entire game from the get-go. I'm like, this is a very important character, and I had themes in mind for that character since nearly day one. Well, since the first day that you had mentioned the character, and we wrote it into both. There's little instances of it. If you listen closely, there's little instances of it in both Sean's theme and in Sarah's theme. Sarah's theme even kind of has an interesting iteration of Proserpina's theme. The two character themes I enjoyed the most was Proserpina's and Raphael's were two of my favorites to write. I could not wait to write Raphael's theme each time it came back. The reason why is because he's the ultimate sort of fallen hero character. He's the character who, because basically fear takes him. I think themes are what composers should focus on, I believe. And I've held on to that so much that any project I've ever worked on has had some kind of theme.
And I think you really hit the mark, especially with Aura theme, which is one of my favorite character themes because it just comes from sort of a very personal place for myself. And it's just the theme itself captures this sort of warmth and hopefulness, but at the same time, it's bittersweet and somewhat sad. So I think you touched upon a few themes already. What I was really interested in is sort of reflecting on which piece was hard to write, especially character pieces that were hard to put down or get the feeling of what the character was really about.
I would say with the character themes, something that was a wonderful asset to that were your incredibly detailed notes, though. I absolutely loved being able to read through and hear their stories before jumping in and writing their themes. To dive into the question, though, I would say one of the more difficult ones starting out was Ark's theme. Ark's theme was incredibly difficult starting out because I had realized that the entire cast had a very emotional type of approach to them. But with regards to Ark, once again had a very, very emotionally based theme, but I wrote it that way on purpose because he's a very empathetic type of character, again, very supportive, but also a very strong character. And so the second half of his theme kind of builds into that, kind of builds into his more like bold and courageous side, whereas this beginning part is a more meek but gentle type of feel. And I picked the clarinet because I thought the clarinet just had such a warming yet soft-spoken type of feel to it, which just totally, absolutely emanated the character to me.
I can also imagine that, like with Sarah, he's more of a, let's say, a bit more reserved than the others. It would be more difficult to write a character or a theme for a character like that.
Yes, absolutely. That's what made his theme a bit more of a challenge. Yeah, definitely. Arcs and Sean's were two of the hardest ones to write. And mostly when I say hardest, it's just really the difficulty was in trying to understand the core of that character.
Yeah, another sort of thing that changed over time were the battles, or how the battle system would evolve and what it would be in Numina itself. That was, at least for me, a really interesting process, figuring that one out, how it would, not only what it would mean gameplay wise, but also what it would sound like, because I remember back then sort of looking more towards a JRPG-ish sort of sound. You've proposed to me back then this more tribal sounding direction, and I remember really being unsure of what this was going to turn out like, but
Yeah.
especially because back then I had this idea of that during the battle, without going into much detail, that the music would change, like a magic or a mana bar that the player would have, and depending on its state, the music would change accordingly. That idea was since then scrapped, but the multiple variations that were born out of this idea of the battle theme are still in the game today, and I think it's really interesting how they came to be. And with the initial idea of the battle system, how they turned out, maybe you can go a bit into your side of the creative process, how they came to be and what you were going for with them.
Yeah, I was just in the what is known as the Year of Skyrim.
Oh, really?
The 2012 was where anybody who was a gamer was playing Skyrim. Some part of me had a bit of random musical inspiration from Skyrim in that sense. I love that they did the chants, but I was thinking, like, what if we combine the ideas of Western gaming and JRPG gaming? Like, what if we combine these ideas and created something that could be that could have that JRPG format? Like, and you can even hear it in the melody. Like the structure is very JRPG. It follows that Uematsu style format and develops and grows, but rhythmically, I wanted to give it something a bit more Western. I wanted to give it structurally something more Western. And so I did that to sort of add this element of ethnic style battling. And so all the battle themes actually have an ethnic style to them.
one point is also really interesting to me, and also looking back on this whole process, because I remember sort of translating the first few minutes I had together from the game back then into English so that you actually could play it back then. Or I think you were the first person that told me that this was sort of this mixture of JRPG influences and more Western themes, because in my mind I was working on a JRPG for the whole time, which is also why I sort of came in with this more mindset of I need to have this more JRPG like soundtrack. But once you told that to me, it all sort of clicked and made sense to me.
Yeah, and it's so cool that you brought that up, because it was funny, because I had always pictured the game in a certain respect, a Western approach and a JRPG sort of foundation. You know, the foundation was always there in all of the themes that have been written. I always wanted to keep that JRPG foundation, but then there are certain tracks that sort of are a bit more Western influenced, and others that are a bit more JRPG influenced. And then there's certain tracks that sort of blend them completely balanced, and that's the battle theme. The battle theme, I think, was the turning point for me as well, where I started to realize where this score was going and how I could focus on getting the right musical style. Because those beginning tracks in any collaboration are always the hardest.
Sort of figuring out where this is going, what the character and mood would be of the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, that's the greatest challenge of any collaboration is finding where the middle ground is.
Yeah, another battle theme I'd love to get into, we talked a bit beforehand about this one, is Aziel's battle theme, which is one of my favorites. And I'd really love to hear a bit from your side again, what the process was with this theme, how it came together.
Yeah, oh yeah. That theme, let's just say very, very appropriately, that theme was a monster. From the get-go, when I first got your notes on Aziel's battle theme, and how you wanted to create something very special and specific for that character's situation and the fight with him, any of those special scenario battle themes, those are the ones that I think deserve some good attention too. I wanted the battle with him to be different than anything you had ever heard in the rest of the game. I wanted it to be like we were entering into this sort of, to bring back a prior word, sort of the tribal ideas that were introduced in the battle themes, and sort of cranks it up to 11. It goes along with the character as well, because in the fight with the character, there are two different phases where he turns back and forth from a beast and into a wizard. And so because of that, I wanted to have the sections of the music transform. And so it does. It actually transforms. The beginning starts with the wizard side, which has very tertiary minor type of chords, just really sort of like dark minor chords, and very intense orchestration, very overwhelmingly big chorus. I knew it had to be choir, and I did that intentionally to sort of explore different regions of emotions, but also to give it that extra intensity, because I think having a choir just brings that extra emotion to the next level. For Aziel's theme, what we did, he has this very dark minor sort of progression with this huge orchestra playing. And then it immediately morphs into this aboriginal type of rhythm, and which actually is entirely an aboriginal type of rhythm format. Very, very advanced. Very
really?
advanced.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it has a groove. It definitely grooves and stays in the pocket, but it's a very advanced rhythmic type of structure that even kind of has a bit of a jazz influence as well. But yeah, so that goes through it each time. Like when he morphs into the beast, I wanted to have something like that could be this unbridled, intense and jarring rhythm that would be really simultaneously like catchy, but also really intense.
major thing I definitely want to talk about was the sort of core or central theme, the title track of Numina, the Hymn of the Harmonious Soul, which has another really, really great title or name to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Especially for me, this was another organically growing process, because initially it was just sort of this, I just needed a title track for the title menu, right?
Yeah, it really is. If I were to describe the title theme for Numina and just the idea behind the whole piece, just in general, like the idea of the theme and the actual melody notes was really just a miracle. I can't even describe how it came to me. Like, there was just one day that I just started hearing this melody in my head just nonstop, and I just could not get it out of my head, and I was wondering if it was from something. I was like, wait, is this from something, or am I, like that's it? I just realized that is the melody for this title theme, and I instantly heard it for a choir piece. I had no doubt in my mind that I would write it for a choral ensemble, because just nothing else in that opening sequence, nothing else would have carried the same emotional weight, and that's why I scored the orchestra really down on that in terms of instrumentation. It's just piano, chorus, and percussion is all it is. Yeah, that section was entirely meant to be just a complete hymnal. What I wanted to do. I wanted to make this hymn that was essentially. I was going through a time then when I just started working on Numina. I guess a lot of self-doubt, and I had just finished my schooling and just didn't know what to do with my life. I had no industry connections whatsoever. Essentially what it comes down to is I was going through a very dark time. I didn't have a lot going for me. I was unemployed. I was straight out of school, and I was living at home. Not a lot going for me, and Numina really just kind of struck hope into me. And so I started really meditating on this idea of hope, and what is, if I could encapsulate the hope of living and the hope of living life and the joy that it brings to music, what would that sound like? And that was what this piece came out of. It came out of a place of feeling a bit hopeless, and I realized that we can feel hopeful. We just have to choose it in the times where it's hard. And I think that kind of really strongly emanates emotionally with the game, because the game itself has a lot of plot points that are very dark, and it's important to be able to carry on. And I think that's the theme that the music portrays.
Oh, you don't know how much this means to me, you saying that, because interestingly enough, Numina for me is sort of the same thing like you described in your earlier experiences. I've also had this dream, or still have, of being a game developer and making a living, or being able to do this full time. And even after I finished uni, I sort of was in this place of feeling a bit disillusioned. And I came back to Numina, and it sort of reassured me and gave me something to do that was meaningful in some way to me. And before I knew it, what really these core themes of the game would be, this piece just sort of got it right from the beginning, before I even know what it's going to be. Maybe it even sort of influenced the way few things went down the road, right?
I'm so pleased to hear you say that. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so pleased, so grateful to have been a part of it, man.
Thank you so much, Tom, and also thank you for your time. This has been very interesting to me personally, but I also hope that all your listeners found this enjoyable and interesting. Now I'll leave you off to the last track of this little featurette, the Hymn of the Harmonious Soul. Enjoy!